So today we're going to be talking about, of course, it has all C words in all the chapters to help you remember the things we've talked about. And the word this week is common, and talking about Jesus being humble. But rather than starting out trying to define humble, I thought, well, I'm going to start with the opposite, and we'll work our way towards humble. So what's opposite of humble? What do you think of somebody that's not humble? Proud? Conceited, okay. Arrogant? There we go. That was the word I was looking for. Arrogance of the world. So who do you think of when you say somebody's arrogant? Is there a certain profession or individual that comes to mind?
I always think of these days as arrogance kind of follows the type of ignorance. It's not really based out of knowledge, it's more based out of just
Selfish driven.
Yeah.
Yep. You can just about pick a sport. I think athletes, most of them are probably the most arrogant people you've ever seen. And the way they will celebrate a routine play, like they just won the Super Bowl. You know, they jump up and they're beating their chest and look at me, look what I did. And, you know, that's what they're doing. They're just taking something very routine and they're turning it into, this was all about me. I'm the reason that this is all happening. But what about other areas? Other than sports? Movie stars. There's a lot of arrogance there.
A lot of politicians.
Politicians. How about education? No? No arrogance in the education world? I'm thinking about people who say, my degree's better than your degree because I went to a better school. We had better teachers. Have y'all heard that? Of course, you got the Ivy League colleges that they think they're like top shelf, they're premier, and they think they're better than us because what they know. What about preachers? Do you see a difference between, well, I'm better because I went to a preaching school rather than a Christian college? And the Christian college says, well, we have a more rounded education than you do. And you know, the arguing about whose teachers are better and all that. They both have their own arguments. Well, we studied hermeneutics. Well, so did we. We studied homiletics. Yeah, we did too. We know other languages. Okay. You know, they've studied the same thing. They did it in different locations. Kirk Brothers, in his book, he said, here's my challenge to all schools, that you train foot washers and not Pharisees. Rather than trying to divide the church, let's work together. And it's good to have some pride in your school, but when you carry it too far, it can be a bad thing. I remember we were I'm pretty sure this was at Northeast when it happened, and a friend from college, A.C. Chrisman, was speaking, and he got up and he's talking about all of these prominent preachers that were in the crowd. And he said, you know, we can look at this two ways. He said, I can really feel inadequate about this. He said, but in reality, they're all lighthouses trying to help the captains get their ship into harbor. So we're all working together, and we just need that mentality. Well, taking arrogance a step further, step backwards, narcissism. Definition of narcissism: excessive interest in or admiration of oneself and one's physical appearance. I was eating with some friends, and they were talking about that over dinner just now. The psychological definition: selfishness involving a sense of entitlement, a lack of empathy, and a need for admiration, as characterizing a personality type. And then the signs of somebody who's a narcissist: entitlement, manipulative behavior, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. Did somebody come to mind? Not that you want to talk about. Well, in Proverbs, Solomon said, pride.
Yeah. I was going to say that it seems like a lot of times when you look at things like that, if you can go back one to the narcissist stuff, we all do this. I mean, especially, we have a lot of things in our country that other countries can't do. We can move up the social ladder, all the way to the top. So, I think that this is kind of like universal. We all suffer from doing things that actually make up a narcissist. Just some of us actually have more self-control or guidance.
Yeah.
Or, just people around us actually point it out.
Or mother to slap your hand and...
Exactly.
So Solomon said in Proverbs, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. And then Paul told the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12, so let the one who thinks he is standing be careful that he does not fall. Pride. Do you think Jesus had a problem with pride? Ever? Was he ever arrogant or proud? I see lots of no. I couldn't think of one verse. Couldn't think of anything. Mark 7, 20 through 23. Jesus said, what comes out of a person defiles him. For from within, out of the human heart, come evil ideas, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, evil, deceit, debauchery, envy, slander, pride, and folly. All these evils come from within and defile a person. It's all something that's generated from within. It's a selfish, personal thing. Well, we couldn't think of anything that Jesus did. What about God? You think God has pride? Two verses came to mind when I thought of this. Matthew 3:17, after Jesus is baptized and a voice came from heaven, said, this is my one dear son. In him I take great delight. That's from the Net Bible. A lot of other translations, this is my beloved son with whom I am well pleased. The Net translators put this note in. It said, behold, a voice from heavens saying that this is an incomplete sentence in the Greek, which portrays intensity and emotion. Something that you don't, just by reading the English language, you don't get that. And so it's translated with a finite word, keeping with the English style, and it just says, said. The voice said. It doesn't say anything about the intensity or the emotion there. Matthew says, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased, as if it's a proclamation to everyone saying, this is my son. Mark and Luke said, you are my son with whom I'm well pleased. So it's more like it was addressed specifically to Jesus, letting him know, I'm proud of you. Also stated at the Transfiguration, this is my beloved son with whom I'm well pleased. Hear ye him. What about the disciples? Did the disciples have a problem with pride? Mark 9, verses 33 to 37. Then he came to Capernaum. Now, Capernaum it's on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. There was a major trade route that went through there. It's estimated that the population was about 1,500 at this time. And this is like Jesus' home office during the Galilean ministry. He went back to Capernaum several times during his ministry. After Jesus was inside the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" He knew what they were discussing, didn't he? But they weren't going to talk about it. Verse 34, but they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. After he sat down and he called the 12 and said to them, "If anyone wants to be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." He took a little child and had him stand among them. Taking him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." So he's trying to get this message through to the apostles. They're arguing about who's going to be the greatest. And can't you see? I mean, Jesus has given them some limited powers and sent them out on a limited commission, and they come back and they're probably arguing over who's the best, who did the best miracle, who did the greatest thing. And that's probably the setting of where they are, what they're arguing about. Pride versus service. Let's look at Mark chapter 10, verses 35 to 45. My phone didn't want to recognize my finger.
You use the pinky to show it.
Yeah. You know my security secret, huh? Verses 35 to 45. And James and John, sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." And Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant with James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Apostles are still struggling with pride after arguing over who's going to be the greatest. Hey, can I sit by you in the kingdom? And in another account, they get their mom involved. They have her ask. So the other apostles are indignant at them. They're all still fighting over this. It's all about pride. There's this desire that they want to emulate socially, politically, religiously. It's all around them. It's in the Roman army. They have a pecking order that goes all the way back to Caesar. It's in the religion. You've got, the priests that serve, and then you have a high priest, and then you've got the Pharisees, Sadducees, in the different sects, and they're all judging each other. Well, we're better than you because we believe in a resurrection and you don't. So they have lots of things that they argue about, but they see that. The apostles see that going on in the world around them, and they're thinking, well, when Jesus gets his kingdom established, we're going to be, we're trying to figure out who's going to be in what seat. Jesus is needing to break this mold of the traditions that they have in their mind. So, what is he going to do? It's going to require more than just talking to them to change them. I was debating on whether I would have time to read all this. Christ's example of his humility. And in Philippians 2, he talks about he emptied himself. He was God. He emptied himself and he became man, not just man, but a servant. And he came to die. And not just any death, he died on a cross. And in their mind, there's glory or the humility of the cross. And he came for the humility of the cross. That's the purpose. That's the reason he came. This is a statue. Didn't know if you'd be able to see it very well or not. Outside the Dallas Theological Seminary, this is a statue. There's one that's there, but there's several copies around. You may have seen something like it, where Jesus is washing the disciples' feet. And the detail on it is just incredible. You might Google it and look at it later. But you can see the veins on the hands and the feet, and it's a really impressive statue. Jesus' humility is a glue that holds us all together. Washing the feet of guests was considered servant's work. And so all of the apostles, disciples, walk into that upper room and they see the bowl there. They see the basin of water. They see the linen cloth. I'm not washing anybody's feet. Wonder who's going to have to wash feet. And what happens? Christ washes their feet. And I thought it was funny. I leaned over to Rhonda Sunday when Tim is assigning us and said that we had to read John 13 this week. Has anybody read it, by the way? We have to read John 13. I told Rhonda, I said, that's my lesson Wednesday night. First 5 verses. Just before the Passover feast, Jesus knew that his time had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now loved them to the very end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, that he should betray Jesus, because Jesus knew the Father had handed all things over to him, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. And he got up from the meal, removed his outer clothes, took a towel and tied it around himself. He poured water in a wash basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel he had wrapped around himself. Excuse me. So this is from the Net translation, and they put evening meal. There's some parts of the country, if you get invited to dinner, you better find out what time the meal is going to be. Because some people think dinner is at noon, and some people think dinner is at 6 or 7. Because they consider lunch, dinner, and dinner, supper. And so because of the discrepancy, they went ahead and put evening meal, which was what the Greek word intended. Okay, so he took off his outer clothes. He still had his loincloth on. So he's taken his clothes off, and looks like a slave. He's dressed like a servant now. He just has the loincloth on, and he picks up this towel. Some translations even say an apron. That's another meaning of that Greek word. It's a long linen, I would have called it maybe a sash. They tie it around the waist, and they've got a long tail still hanging down after they've tied it on, and they would use that in their cleaning. And so he washes the disciples' feet, and he's got this long tail of this linen cloth that he can dry their feet off with. Most of John, or all of John chapter 13, is one sentence in the Greek. But translators have gone through and they broke it up and put punctuation in to make it more readable in the English so we can understand it. John Maxwell has a leadership Bible. He said that John 13, Jesus shows his disciples humility. He's not just telling them, he's washing their feet to teach them a lesson. Nobody wanted to do this. Nobody wanted to serve one another and wash feet. Have y'all had Marlene come wash your feet yet? She'll give you a good massage. John Maxwell said, Jesus knew who he was, and he was secure enough to get down on the floor and wash his disciples' feet. He didn't have to prove anything. In fact, he had nothing to prove, nothing to lose, nothing to hide. The insecure are into titles. The secure are into towels. It's hours from the cross. It's getting really close. And Jesus is washing the disciples' feet. The guys who are, they're going to forsake him. They're going to leave. They're going to deny him. They're going to betray him. And he's washing their feet. Teaching them all about humility. I think the mentality of most people is that most people don't want to serve. It's beneath them. That's somebody else's job. That's not my responsibility. I'm not doing that. People generally have a lower view of servers, when you think of like in the restaurant business anyway. People who are serving for money, monetary gain, I think they're kind of looked down upon a little bit. They're different from somebody that's going to serve sacrificially. And others assume that the server is the lowest position in a company because they're having to wait on you. But we all know it's the busboy. The food industry, I mentioned that they serve for money. But it's different if somebody is serving sacrificially. If they're not going to get anything out of this, they're not getting any monetary gain, they're not expecting anything in return. Serving somebody without a reward, a monetary reward, it's rewarding to the person who serves them. It's better to give than to receive. Years ago, I was working, this was about 35 years ago. I was working in Amarillo, and they built a new loop. They started building a new loop that goes around the southeast side of the city. So if you're coming into town from the east, you can get on that loop and go around from I-40 around to I-27 and not have to go mess with all the downtown traffic. And when they first put it in, it was so inconvenient and people didn't know about it. I say inconvenient. There's very few people that could actually use the loop because unless you're lived on the south side of town and you're going out to the airport. That was me. We lived on the south side of town, and so I would take the loop and avoid all the traffic downtown in that big mix miser that they had. So I'm driving home from work. I'd worked an early morning shift, so it's afternoon, and as I'm driving down the loop, and it's a ghost town out there. I rarely saw cars driving on the loop when they first opened it. And so I'm driving home, and I see this car coasting real slow, and they pulled over on the side of the road. And it was a Cadillac, fairly new Cadillac. And I thought, it's a long walk to anywhere from where we are because there was no convenience stores or anything out there. There weren't even houses out there. So I thought I better go see if I can help them. So I turned around, went back, and the engine's running fine. When I walked up to the car, and it was funny that I'm wearing blue jeans and a flannel shirt, and I guess I looked a little rough. The lady, she cracked her window about this much. She said, "Well, it's running fine." She said, "But look," and she's tromping the gas pedal. but it's not doing anything. I said, oh, your linkage cable probably just came loose. I said, can you pop the hood and I'll see if I can put it back on. Okay. So she popped the hood and then I put it on and I said, do you have a paper clip or a hairpin or something I could use just to help keep it on? And she didn't. I went and looked and I found a paper clip in my car. So I got it fixed to where it would hold it on. I said, okay, it'll get you back to town. And she goes, oh, thank you. And so then she took money and she's trying to slip it out that little slit that she's got the window open. She goes, oh, here, thank you. And I said, no, I'm not going to take your money. But I thought that was funny. But I didn't stop to take her money. So I wasn't trying to, I was just sacrificing a little bit of my time. Sacrificial serving. Who do you think of today that is a sacrificial servant? Who in your life?
Mothers are.
There, I was going to give a hint. Said happens in May. Mothers are the most sacrificial people that we deal with in our lives. I mean, from the time you're little, they bathe you, they feed you, they sacrifice a lot of their time for you. And so what happens when these kids grow up and they get on TV and the first thing they say is, hi, Mom. They're recognizing the person that has sacrificed so much to help them out. This is John Maxwell again. He said, people are drawn to those who serve them sacrificially, not repelled by them. Service adds value to people. Servanthood is not about a position or a skill. It's about attitude. Jesus had multitudes following him. For one thing, the miracles, occasionally a free meal. But more than that, he was helping people out. He was healing the sick, raising the dead. That's not just about making your boo-boo better, but it's about making your lifestyle better, improving your life. So after washing the disciples' feet, we're going back to John 13, and we skip the part where Peter's saying, oh, well, I don't need to be washed. And then he says, oh, well, wash all of me then. And so anyway, picking up in verse 12, so when Jesus had washed their feet and put his outer clothing back on, he took his place at the table again, and he said to them, do you understand what I have done for you? Most translations say, to you. You call me teacher and Lord, and do so correctly, for that is what I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you too ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example. You should do just as I have done for you. Have y'all ever gone and washed somebody's feet? It's not a custom in our culture. Oh, really?
Well, 2 babies at home.
Oh. We just took them out in the backyard and hosed them off. The example that Jesus gave, he was dealing with the apostles' pride and their arrogance. They're arguing about who's the greatest and can I sit by you in the kingdom? And they come in for the Last Supper, the last meal they're going to have with Jesus. Of course, they didn't know that. And there's the basin and the towel. And nobody wanted any part of that. And so Jesus washed their feet to show them what they're going to have to do. I jumped ahead of myself. Breaking that cycle of pride by showing them how to serve with a basin of water. 1 John 3:16, we have come to know love by this, that Jesus laid down his life for us, that we ought to lay down our lives for our fellow Christians. We must be people of humility. We're going to have to be willing to serve those people, to impress them, and get them to come. All right. No greater love. This is jumping ahead a couple of chapters. John chapter 15, verses 10 through 13. If you obey my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you these things so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. My commandment is this, to love one another just as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, that one lays down his life for his friends. Making that ultimate sacrifice, of course, you think about the military and what they have done for us. January 13th, 1982. Didn't know if you'd be able to see that picture. I don't know if y'all remember this or not. There was an Air Florida flight that was taking off of Washington National, and they had already de-iced. There was a bad winter storm. It was icing and snowing, and on takeoff, they had iced up again, and it was so heavy they couldn't climb. They got to their normal speed where they start to climb out, but they just weren't climbing. They didn't understand what was going on. They hit the 14th Street Bridge and hit 4 cars that were on the bridge and then crashed into the Potomac. Do you remember this? And they're like, oh, what are we going to do? Because the Potomac was iced over, except where the plane just went in, and there's icy water. And people started coming out the tail section, broke off the back of the plane. And there were 6 survivors that were in the water out there. So a police helicopter went out, and they're throwing the little life rings and stuff, flotation devices down to them, trying to help them out. And they even got the helicopter down, and they're like hovering. The skids of the helicopter were actually in the water. And they were trying to get him to climb up. Well, it was slick, and it kept falling off because it was icy. And so then they said, well, here, we got a rope. Just grab this rope, and we'll drag you over to the shore one at a time. And so this guy, his name was Arland Williams, Jr., and he catches the rope, and he wraps it around the first passenger, and so they dragged them to shore, came back. He catches the rope again and wraps it around another passenger and dragged them. And so 5 times he catches the rope and ties it around somebody else and sends them to shore. And as they're dragging the last person out of that 5th passenger to the shore, that tail section came loose and it rolled over, and he drowned there. He gave his life. He had 5 chances that he could have gotten out of the river and sacrificed himself to save those other 5 people. God opposes the proud. James said, but he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Peter said the same thing. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. They're both quoting Proverbs 3 and verse 34. Then later in Proverbs 6, 16 through 19. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who bears out lies, and one who sows discord among the brothers. Haughty eyes, a proud look, an abomination to the Lord. Somebody who has a proud look, their pride, and like walking around the barnyard like the rooster. He's so proud of the way he looks. All right, 2 Timothy 3, 1-5. But understand this, that in the last days difficult times will come, for people will be lovers of selves, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, slanderers, without self-control, savage, opposed to what is good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, loving pleasure rather than loving God. They will maintain the outward appearance of religion, but will have repudiated its power. So avoid people like these, the arrogant. Avoid people like these. Arrogance is a deadly disease. Kirk Brothers talked about in the book. Arrogance is the opposite of humble, but all leaders are susceptible to this. Leaders can get arrogant because of the position they have. It's a trap that preachers will fall into, and they'll want to compare each other. Well, how many members do you have at your congregation? Well, how many people did you baptize last year? Well, how many Bible studies did you have? And they'll get into a comparison thing to try and one up each other, make themselves feel more important. In the secular world, you see worker that gets promoted to supervisor, and I saw this several times throughout my career. He gets promoted to a supervisor, and he becomes a dictator. He's no longer your friend because now you got to do what I say. And they just, once they get that power, they just become a different person. And Kirk Brothers says that this could even happen with elders and deacons because they're in that office. Elders are to shepherd the flock, not individual sheep. And deacons, you have to remember what deacon means. Deacon means servant. We must continue to be Lord-centered and not leader-centered so that a congregation doesn't get preacheritis. Well, is pride a thorn in your flesh? Do you ever get judgmental about other congregations? What they're doing? I put fellow sinners. Kirk Brothers talked about in the book, people who respond to the invitation. Sometimes they're looked down upon, they're gossiped about, rather than lovingly embraced. Someone's income bracket. Do we get judgmental about that? Whether they're above us or below us? Uneducated. Bless their heart, they can't even put a sentence together. Just social outcasts. People seeking benevolence. Ooh, okay. That's stepping on my toes here a little bit. Race, culture, gender. I mean, there's all those, this whole list of things is stuff that we could become judgmental about. If these creep into our hearts, they'll ooze out in our conduct, in our conversation. Brother said to stay humble, we need to remember our mistakes and our weaknesses and what God has done for us in spite of those mistakes. Let he who is without sin throw the first stone. Huh? We have to keep our eyes on Jesus and follow his example. He's a friend with publicans and sinners. He washed the disciples' feet. F.B. Meyer wrote a commentary, and this was his comment about it. He said, I used to think God's gifts were on shelves, one above the other, and the taller we grew, the more easily we could reach them. I find that God's gifts are on shelves, one beneath the other. And it's not a question of growing taller, but stooping lower, bowing down to get those gifts. Questions? Comments?
You have anything with 2 Corinthians 10:12?
Go ahead. I think I did at one time, but then I skipped over it.
I just keep thinking of it from what you're saying. Not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are committing themselves. When they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding.
Yeah. Compare yourselves and you don't see. You're not understanding what really is. So we've been talking about Jesus' characteristics, that he was centered, he was connected, compassionate, common, humble. So next week we're going to talk about clear thinking. He made wise decisions.